Our top story at 5, former Bexar County District Attorney Nico LaHood is placed on probation.
The State Bar of Texas Grievance Committee found he committed professional misconduct while he was in office. Eyewitness News reporter Sharon Coe sat down with LaHood to talk about this ruling and to get his side.
The real story here is not so much about the probation, is about what they did not find. Because
former Bexar County DA Nico LaHood denies any wrongdoing, despite a number of allegations presented against him.
The true headline should have been no reprimand for ex-DA for making alleged threats or illegal behavior.
He says what got him in trouble was a statement claiming someone was guilty. Local media reported a state district judge said that during a murder trial, LaHood threatened to destroy an opposing attorney's law practice. That attorney, current DA Joe Gonzalez.
All I can tell you is the commission didn't believe that.
LaHood blames the Express News, accusing the paper of malicious intent with their reports of what happened.
Definitely showed reckless disregard for truthful reporting by the paper, and the paper started this domino effect. And the finding essentially was that I made statements that I shouldn't have made to the press. That's essentially what the finding was. There was no finding of threats, there was no finding of criminal behavior, and there was no finding of dishonest behavior.
The paper's columnist, Brian Chasnoff, who made the original report, responded to KENS 5 with a statement saying, quote, "I stand by my reporting. I've only reported facts of the incident and its consequences." According to the bar's grievance committee, they found that in the course of representing a client, LaHood did make an extrajudicial statement that he knew would have the likelihood of materially prejudicing an adjudicatory proceeding. It continued to say he used means that had no substantial purpose other than to embarrass, delay, or burden a third person. LaHood is placed on probation for a year, but as long as he follows strict guidelines, he'll continue to be able to practice law. He's also required to pay nearly $10,000 in attorney fees and expenses. Sharon Coe, KENS 5, Eyewitness News.
That incident is what motivated Joe Gonzalez to run against Nico LaHood and defeat him to become district attorney. DA Gonzalez issued a statement saying he is satisfied with the outcome, adding, quote, "This reaffirms my belief that the system works, especially regarding the state bar's ability to police its members, especially lawyers that are public officials. It is now time to move on."